You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. And first and foremost, let me start out by wishing you a happy new year. It's 2025. And as we shake off the confetti and champagne from the celebrations, we're going to be stepping into a year full of possibilities, good and bad, of course. And let's be honest, there's, plenty of question marks out there, right? Every new year brings its own share of challenges and opportunities, but this one feels particularly charged. We're looking at a world where the economic landscape is being rewritten in real time. There's a new administration in Washington. You probably heard that. And that's going to obviously stir up the pot. But this time it's no more than just a new leadership. It's really potentially an entire change in the way that policy is conducted. So what's ahead? Will we see sweeping tax cuts as promised? I bet we will. And if we do, how will those tax cuts affect deficits and inflation and interest rates? Can the economy sustain the heat, or are we looking at overheating and runaway inflation like we did before? Hopefully not, but that's possible. Then there's the topic of spending cuts, which, talked about Doge and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Spending cuts, are they realistic? Will they, end up being all talk, no action, or just simply not enough? And tariffs, of course, will they be wielded as an economic weapon? And if so, how will they impact everyday consumers? Of course, these are not just academic questions. They have real-world implications for your investments, your business, and, of course, your financial future. For example, real estate investors are watching interest rates like hawks, right? That's what we're all doing. And the Fed originally had said they were going to lower those rates throughout 2025, but then they seemed to back off on those statements in the last meeting, saying that they're going to kind of take a bit of a more wait-and-see position there. Meanwhile, deregulation, another buzzword for 2025, a big point of concentration from the Trump administration. Could that create new opportunities for businesses? Will it make a big difference? Bottom line is it's a lot to unpack, and that's what we're going to try to do this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. We're going to do that with a guy who's been on the show before. His name is Howard Uris. He's an economist and professor and author of The Understandable Economics. And we will get to that interview right after these messages.
Wealth Formula Banking is an ingenious concept powered by whole life insurance. But instead of acting just as a safety net, the strategy supercharges your investments. First, you create a personal financial reservoir that grows at a compounding interest rate, much higher than any bank savings account. As your money accumulates, you borrow from your own bank to invest in other cash-flowing investments. Here's the key. Even though you've borrowed money at a simple interest rate, your insurance company keeps paying you compound interest on that money, even though you've borrowed it. Net result, you make money in two places at the same time. That's why your investments get supercharged. This isn't a new technique. It's a refined strategy used by some of the wealthiest families in history, and it uses century-old, rock-solid insurance companies as its backbone. Turbocharge your investments. Visit wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is been on before. He is Howard Uris, and he is an economist, professor, and attorney. He's taught a variety of courses on economics and business and currently teaches at NYU. He's previously served as executive vice president and general counsel of Radian Group, which is one of the largest guarantors of debt in the world. He graduated from Brown, studied at the London School of Economics, and also earned a law degree at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the author of Understandable Economics, because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. Howard, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks so much. Great to be here, Buck.
So a lot has happened. I think you were on back in it's been over a year. And, most notably, we have a new administration that's about to come in. And I would just love to get your thoughts as an economist on what you would predict based on not only, I think, what the administration ran on, but also probably the realities. Everybody who runs for president has an agenda, has things they think say they're going to do things, but they may not even believe those things themselves. So I'm curious your take on the current situation as we end up in 2025 soon and a new administration.
That's a great question. And as you said, what people say when they run for office can be something quite different from what they do after being elected. And I think this time around, that's probably even more true. On the other hand, though, there's an interesting factor here in that the one party controls the Congress and the White House, and people would argue the Supreme Court as well. So there is more of an ability to carry out the proposed agenda. That said, what are the main plans for this administration? Tax cuts. That's at the top of everyone's list. And I think we can all agree that tax cuts do seem likely given what the president has said and given the orientation of Congress. So we're likely to get tax cuts. What about spending? What's going to happen to spending? Ramaswamy and Musk are not politicians. They're business people. They're not elected. They're not responsible to the voters. Donald Trump is. They're going to propose, I don't see how they're going to propose $2 trillion in cuts, but they will propose cuts. And if they're not politically popular, I cannot see Donald Trump having them enacted. So I think there probably will be a lot of noise about spending in terms of actual action. The action is going to be on tax cuts. On the spending, I don't really see the spending cut. So what does that mean? Tax cuts and not much of a cut in spending. That means the deficit is going to grow. I think we can safely say that. It grew a lot during Trump's first term, and I think that's only a small indication of what we're going to see in this term. What else is going on? They're talking about tariffs, and that Trump does unilaterally have the ability to implement tariffs. What do tariffs do? They increase prices for consumers, leading to higher prices and a possible reaction from the Fed to raise interest rates. Where all this is going is higher interest rates.
So let me ask you this, though, just on the tariff piece, because a lot of people talk about this. Tariffs are one of the things that I wonder personally. I mean, obviously, they do have an impact on the economy. We know that it probably, increases our own costs and inflation. But to what extent do you believe that that's one of those things where, he uses tariffs potentially as a weapon? I mean, even some of the tariffs that he placed against China are still in place. It's not like the Biden administration, removed them.
Yeah, absolutely. There have always been tariffs. Over the course of history, tariffs have generally come down. The question is what he's going to do regarding tariffs in his new term. I think his bark is a lot worse than his bite. I think when it comes to tariffs, you may see some marginal increase. I don't think that's going to be one of the signature issues of this administration. During the campaign, it might have seemed like it would be, but it's a dead end because it's just going to cause higher consumer prices. And I think to the extent he does go heavily into tariffs at the beginning, he's going to see the effect and back off. But the one thing I think we can bet our money on is tax cuts. I think that is the one thing they're all aligned to enact. And that, again, is what does that spell? Higher interest rates, because the higher the tax cuts, assuming they don't have matching spending cuts, which I think we can also agree they're not going to be able to come up with that. It's higher deficits, higher interest rates to fund those deficits. And then we could talk about what effect those higher interest rates would have on the economy.
So basically, the thought is tax cuts will create a bigger budget deficit, will probably stimulate the economy quite a bit too. Not that that's a bad thing, but it also comes with, I guess, an inflationary response. Is that part of what you're suggesting? Is you got a budget deficit on top of that, you got a hot economy, and that leads to inflation? Help us understand where the interest rates becoming higher comes from?
Great question. The tax cuts are probably going to be primarily for upper income individuals. So there will be some stimulative effect, but nothing very significant. It's not like suddenly having a New Deal jobs program, which puts money in people's pockets who are formerly unemployed. So yes, there will be some stimulative effect, which is not great for inflation. But the one thing that it certainly does is it increases the budget deficit, because there's no way that the stimulative effect is going to cause such a boom in the economy that tax receipts are going to go up as a result of the cut. We saw that during the first Trump term, that tax cuts did not increase tax collections, and we're probably more likely to see that this term because the economy is even stronger now than it was back then. So the one thing I think we can all bet on is a higher deficit, which unequivocally means higher interest rates to fund that deficit.
Okay. So your thesis on 2025 then is that the Fed will stop its policy. It's projected for rates to come down in 2025, but you would say that that's not going to happen? Or are you talking about longer term, like 2026, 2027?
Well, their influence on longer term rates is secondary. They control the short term rates. And we already hear murmurings from Fed governors that they're going to slow down the rate of decrease. I think they're concerned about inflation. They seem to be very fixated on the 2.0 number, which personally, I think slight deviations from that are statistical noise. Nevertheless, they seem fixated on that 2.0 number. So they're already talking about slowing the rate of decrease in interest rates. I think once Trump gets in and they start seeing the deficit growing, they start seeing the effect of the increase in tariffs. And again, I think it's unlikely he's going to increase tariffs as much as he indicated he would during the campaign. But whatever increase there is goes right to consumer prices. So I think once they see that, there'll be an even greater slowdown in their interest in lowering interest rates.
Trump named Scott Bessent as the Treasury Secretary. He's no dummy.
Definitely not.
And I'm curious. I mean, maybe people don't really know who he is. Maybe you can give us a little bit of background and tell us what you think his influence on this administration will be.
No doubt about it. He's an enormously successful money manager who's made billions of dollars. He managed money for Soros and many very successful investors. And he has some unorthodox views. He's said in certain contexts that raising interest rates can increase spending. And the conventional wisdom is raising interest rates decrease spending. Why? People, it's just more expensive to borrow money. People don't spend. He raised the theory that when interest rates go up, it puts more money in people's pockets, and therefore they spend more. So it's counterintuitive. I think he's wrong. But if you increase interest rates, factories are less likely to expand. Businesses are less likely to expand. It's just the cost of money is higher. So there's less spending. There's another side to that as well. The higher interest rates, the more of an incentive people have to save, to not spend today, to spend tomorrow and benefit from the higher interest rate. So I think that he has said that. I don't know if he believes it. Again, he's a very smart guy. He's made a lot of money. So I think maybe he said, a lot of people have said a lot of things to get employed in the new administration. But what they do once they're there is another issue. So I'm very skeptical. Again, he is unequivocally a bright guy who's made a lot of money. So the question is the difference between what people say and what people actually do can be quite big.
There is and I think probably I would say it's real because perception is real in markets. But there's a Trump effect. I mean, you're seeing it already in the financial markets.
The stock market has done spectacularly, and I think that is a clear reaction to him, the likelihood that he is going to reduce regulation, which
Right.
has a direct effect on bottom lines. That's a one-off benefit to business when he comes in, and assuming he does it. Again, there's always that possible disconnect between what's said on the campaign trail and what's actually done after the candidate's in office. But assuming they follow through on that, and I have every reason to believe that they'll follow through on it to some extent, that's a direct benefit to the bottom line. And that's especially true given, as we discussed before, Trump's party controls both houses of Congress.
Yeah. So, okay. So deregulation is a big focus, and it's interesting. I didn't realize, I get a sense of how bad it was, but, I think here in California, I read some article where if somebody wanted to, start cutting hair, they had to spend like $15,000 to get permitted. And it's like, wow. $15,000 for somebody who's, to me, a hairstylist is a lot. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Insane was the exact word I was going to use.
Right.
It's totally insane. I talk about this in the book, how there's so much regulation. For instance, if you want to wash hair in a salon, this is actually in understandable economics. You need a special license. These regulations are more designed to protect the people in those professions rather than to protect the public from poor service. And to the extent that these kinds of regulations can be undone, that's a great thing. As I discuss in Understandable Economics, it's nonsensical to be either for regulation or against regulation. Some regulation that keeps the water clean and the air clean is obviously great. Regulation that interferes with people's ability to set up a salon or to wash customers' hair is ridiculous and should be stopped. It's protectionist, I'd say, and someone has to put an end to that. And I think we're going to see some of that go away. I hope we see some of that go away in the new administration.
Although, one of the things that it strikes me is, a lot of those regulations are not at the federal level, right? Just because the federal regulations go down doesn't mean like the craziness in California for their own, regulations has to respond to that. Is there any hope that there would be any sort of trickle down to states like California and New York that typically have these kinds of oppressive regulatory standards and fees?
Well, we can always hope. The question is whether our hopes will be fulfilled.
Yeah.
Bill Maher famously wanted to install solar panels on his house. I don't know if you're familiar with this. And he kept a running tally of how many days it took. And I don't know the exact number, but it was about 1,000 days to get all the permits to achieve this change to his home, which is clearly would clearly benefit the environment. I think the federal government does control a lot of regulations. A lot of regulation is at the federal level. So to the extent that gets reduced, again, unnecessary regulations that protect particular industries rather than the public, to the extent that gets rolled back a bit, maybe there will be some follow-on effect at the state level. Maybe people will see that as a benefit and there'll be some effort at the state level. But there are quite a few regulations at the federal level that are worth looking at and determining whether they remain necessary.
So let's talk about just a very principle thing. I think, you're a professor, and my audience is a lot of good students, right? We have a lot of physicians, lawyers, things like that. And sometimes some of the basics escape us. And I know you've written this book, Understandable Economics. So help us understand this. Is there or is there not any chance that this economy becomes so stimulated, growing at 4% per year, say, because of this Trump effect and because of deregulation and all that, that growth can offset some of these issues? I know your general answer is going to be unlikely, but tell us why that's not likely. Tell us why this concept, I guess, it is a little bit stems back from, Reaganomics and that kind of thing that maybe we have some precedents for, but help us understand that the big picture, because a lot of times that's kind of where, a lot of us are hopeful about.
I agree completely. I think in the after the Great Recession, there was some criticism, both from the right and the left of Obama, for not stimulating the economy enough, that the economy was not run hot enough. There was additional capacity in the economy, and the government should have been doing more to tap it. So the question is, where are we now? Is the economy so hot that there's no room for growth? And there's no clear answer to that. I don't have that, and anyone who says they know the answer to that is trying to fool you and probably fooling themselves. So what's more risky, running the economy too hot or not hot enough? You're losing opportunity. There are people who don't have jobs as a result of an economy not running at full steam. There are people who are not earning as much money as they could when an economy is not running at full steam. So Trump's going to put his foot on the accelerator. Will it add steam to the economy, or will it just cause inflation? My sense is that the tax cuts are so massive, and we're currently at a point where unemployment is at a historic low, that people seem to be employed and the resources seem to be employed, that any significant stimulation to the economy, such as through a massive tax cut without matching decreases in spending, is likely to cause inflation, to cause the economy to overheat. There's one other problem with that. The deficit. As the deficit grows, the federal government's going to have to borrow more money. The only way they could get more money is by raising interest rates. And so that's going to have a feedback loop on the economy and possibly tamp it down a bit. But we're going to have to look at how this all plays out. But the one prediction I'm sticking to is a significant increase in interest rates.
Is it possible to, practically speaking, is it possible to increase GDP significantly without creating inflation?
Yes, if there's underutilized capacity, economists always say there's no free lunch. There is a free lunch. When the economy is underutilized in a recession or a depression, you can just print the money and watch it grow. So there is a free lunch. I've never understood that. In most contexts, no, there's no free lunch. But in that particular context, yes, there is a free lunch. And clearly, we're not in a situation where there is significant underutilized capacity, significant unemployment. We're throwing money at the economy would just create more output. That's not the situation we're in today.
Okay, so just understanding the idea of underutilized, the using your assets just being underutilized there. So you're talking about the workforce. You're talking about basically a booming economy that without maximal employment. Is that the scenario?
Resources and people. It's really the same thing. They're underutilized. There's high unemployment. There's underutilized capacity. Factories are not operating at top capacity. That's the time when stimulation from the federal government, more spending, lower taxes, would push those resources, those human beings who are unemployed, back into use. But that's not the situation we're in today, given the incredibly low unemployment rate. That's why I don't think it's going to result in meaningful growth in the GDP. It's certainly worth trying to run the economy hot, because when you run the economy hot, the downside is a little inflation. When it's not hot enough, you have people who are unemployed, which is a terrible thing. I think that's worse than a small amount of inflation. The question is, when you use too much stimulus at a time when the economy is fully utilized, you can get significant inflation, which is a very bad thing. We saw the reaction 2 years ago to the inflation we experienced during COVID. I think it resulted in Joe Biden's being pushed out and Harris losing the presidency.
So give us a sense, generally speaking, timelines. I mean, we're getting near New Year's here. So what happens in 2025? You think, I guess, you're talking about Trump running the economy hot, but I mean, to what extent is that his decision, and to what extent is it the Federal Reserve? I mean, can't they just slam on the brakes and not let him,
I would say from the fiscal side, yes, it is decision. It is
Yeah,
his
sure.
decision. The
Sure.
Congress seems more than willing to go along with what he wants. So the
Right.
question is, how does the Fed react? I
Yeah.
think the Fed is, as I said, the one thing I would bet on is higher interest rates. If tax cuts come without matching spending cuts, which I don't think can possibly happen, they're going to have to issue more debt, and the only way you could sell more debt is to raise interest rates. And if inflation comes as a result of these tax cuts or the tariffs that he always talks about, raising the price of consumer goods, you're going to have the Fed also raising interest rates. So it's going to be a double whammy. They're going to have to raise interest rates to sell the debt they need to fund the deficit, and you'll have the Federal Reserve raising interest rates at the same time, which is a recipe for serious increase in interest rates.
Got it. We have a lot of real estate investors in this space, and I'm curious on your take on, what happens with real estate prices over the course of the next year or two.
Well, higher interest rates are pretty much a guarantee that real estate prices will be soft.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the other hand, there's a lot of money sloshing around in the economy, especially with the tax cuts that I'm all but certain are coming. So that will have the other effect in that the money has to go somewhere. But I think the increase in interest rates is probably going to have the stronger effect and cause investors to look elsewhere to put their money.
Yeah. So I guess in those situations, people will often look to, fixed income opportunities like bonds and that kind of thing. And that's kind of what you're
Yeah, my
saying.
one prediction is the interest rate on federal debt is going to go up significantly.
Right.
Also, equities look good because
Yeah.
you're going to have this reduction in regulation, which is a boon to the bottom line, straight to the bottom line. So equities, I would guess equities should do decently as well. I think real estate is the asset class that would probably be hit the hardest. It also depends, all real estate markets are local.
Yeah.
And high interest rates deter development. So it's a fixed supply. So on the other hand, that reduced supply leads to higher prices.
When you talk about higher interest rates, are you talking about higher than we've already experienced?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. I think given the magnitude of the tax cuts coming, the magnitude of the spending cuts, which is, in my opinion, is likely to be small because, again, Trump is a politician. Ramaswamy and Musk are not. If they come up with something that's not popular, he's a populist. He's not going to do something that's going to significantly undermine his popularity. I do not believe they're going to cut Social Security. If they did, I think there would be a flip in Congress as fast as you could imagine in the midterm elections. So I think that the deficit is going to go up very significantly. They're going to have to raise interest rates on the debt to sell it. And it's a vicious cycle because the more debt they have and the higher the interest rates, the more of the federal budget has to be devoted to interest, further increasing the deficit. So it's a kind of vicious cycle.
Right. You have a book called Understandable Economics, because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. Sounds pretty self-explanatory, but can you tell us a little bit about who it's for and what value you think people would get from that?
Absolutely. The book was written because I think economics is terribly taught. It's taught as a bunch of formulas when it's really about how we all interact to deal with the fact that we have scarce resources. There's no jargon, no formulas, no graphs in the book. It's supposed to read like narrative nonfiction and explain the economy through analogies and simple examples. So that's the audience is just anyone who's interested in how the macro economy works. And I think there are a lot of people interested in that. Economic issues were at the forefront of this election. And I think we'd all be better off if the average American had a better understanding of how it all worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's understandable economics because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. I presume it's available pretty much everywhere, Amazon, all
Pretty
that.
much everywhere.
Yep.
And I'm pleased to say that the paperback edition is coming out in August. So
Okay, fantastic. Howard Yaris, thank you so much for being back on the show.
thank you, Buck. I really appreciate it.
Be right back.
You make a lot of money, but are still worried about retirement. Maybe you didn't start earning until your 30s, and now you're trying to catch up. And meanwhile, you've got a mortgage and private school to pay for, and you feel like you're getting farther and farther behind. Good news. If you need to catch up on retirement, check out a program put out by some of the oldest and most prestigious life insurance companies in the world. It's called Wealth Accelerator. It can help you amplify your returns quickly, protect your money from creditors, and provide financial protection to your family if something happens to you. The concepts here are used by some of the wealthiest families in the world, and there's no reason why they can't be used by you. Check it out for yourself by going to wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And of course, I guess we'll just have to see, a lot of these things that we're talking about. We will find out one way or another what happens in 2025. In the meantime, if you are interested and you are an accredited investor, we do have a group called the Wealth Formula Investor Club, which is an accredited investor group. If you'd like to join, go to wealthformula.com. Check it out. That's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.